There we go. So we've got three speakers for this next slot. So we've got Lucas Linder, a part of the Munich Re Global Consulting Unit. We've got Thibault Immert, who is part of is an insurance solutions manager at Munich Re. And we are also joined by Till Kishkat, who is also part of Munich Re's Global Consulting Unit. So this session from the Munich Re team will be quite interesting. It's a sharing of some insights that the team has gained through conducting a AI crowd pricing game. So we'll hear about their approach, methodologies, and also some learnings. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the Munich Re team.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so welcome to the session to discuss on the pricing game and the outcome. So as you mentioned, the three speakers, so it's mainly going to be Till and Lucas. So Till is an actuarial consultant and Lucas, an international graduate trainee, both based in Munich and member of the Global Consulting Unit. And for my part, I am insurance solution manager based in Singapore, but also member of the Global Consulting Unit. So in terms of the agenda, so the idea is really to very briefly introduce who we are, because when we think of Munich Re, we don't necessarily think of retail pricing, primary insurance related topics. So we'll do this very briefly, and then I'll hand it over to Till and Lucas such that they can really go into the core of the topic, meaning what is the pricing game, what was it about, their methodology, and the lesson learned and potential outlook for next steps. So very briefly, so as it's been mentioned, we are part of the Global Consulting Unit, and our purpose and main task is really supporting Munich Re's client on primary insurance related topic. So I would say around two pillars: risk advisory and portfolio performance. So on the actuarial side, that would mean risk modeling, behavioral modeling, all of the modeling part, and also portfolio monitoring, pricing and underwriting committees. So on various clients, as you can see, so primary insurers, but not only, and trying to cover as much as possible throughout the value chain. So this is the setup, and part of this Global Consulting Unit is the pricing tribe, which Till, Lucas, and myself are part of. So here we can see a bit the setup with various people. So of course, most of the team being based in Munich, but also a few people in Singapore, Sydney, and Johannesburg. And the idea, the setup is really to work as a truly global team based on people, capabilities, and experience on the various market and the different topics. So I'm just going to stop here regarding this, and I'll hand it over to Till and Lucas.
Perfect. Many thanks, Thibault, for the introduction. I will now focus on giving a bit more of an overview of the pricing game and how the details of that actually kind of worked, so you're in the broader picture. So first off, we are very happy to announce that we gained 7th place overall. So that you can see as the username TK230147 in AI Crowd's motor insurance market simulation pricing game. Well, the main objective was, in this case, a two-way approach, thus the estimate of individual claim sizes and designing also a pricing strategy within the cheapest wins market. Overall, there were really quite a few, so over 1,800 participants, either in teams or by themselves, representing insurance companies in the simulated market. And quite interesting in this particular case compared to other, well, I would say similar kind of maybe Kaggle-like competitions, was that most of these actually came from within the actuarial profession. And this was reflected by some of the most important and largest actuarial bodies sponsoring these events, also with prize money. So this gave us an opportunity really to collaborate with our colleagues from Munich Re, work on topics and also just really to have some fun in a simulated kind of environment, in which it's really getting down on the kind of fun aspects of data modeling, where some certain issues that normally reflect a lot of your work, like for instance, feature engineering or also data cleaning, played a lesser role than they do in the normal kind of time. So though we are very happy that we did gain 7th place overall, we do have to kind of admit, and Lucas will deep dive on a little bit later, that there was quite some fluctuation over the assessment period between the teams. And this is, of course, partially done to luck, even though the aspect of luck was really tried to be downplayed by the 3-stage approach, which we'll talk about later in the kind of in this simulated pricing game. But it's also that we did try out some different strategies, and we really tested the bounds of what is possible in this. Thus, we really wanted to see from week to week, are new approaches kind of working out? And if they're not, because we really dropped significantly, we went back to kind of what has worked in the past. So part of this was really also something that we really accepted and really wanted to try out. But now let's jump to a more detailed introduction on description of the pricing game. So maybe a couple of words on the AI crowd. So that's the platform on which this game was set. It is essentially very similar to Kaggle and offers a wide range of topics, from insurance topics like this pricing game to Alzheimer's, to maybe picture recognition, convolutional neural networks, etc. So really the entire breadth of domain topics and also methodologies that are used. Now, the overarching goal of the pricing game was to create a realistic setting in which 2 components were addressed separately. Namely, for one, the risk model to estimate future claims experience given historical data. I think this is something that most actuaries, especially pricing actuaries, are extremely familiar with and could basically do at 3 o'clock in the morning, essentially. So that's your kind of standard frequency-based Poisson models, your severity-based gamma models, multiply them together, or also kind of don't stick to the GLM structure, but do it with tree-based kind of methods, or also model it directly with Tweety, but essentially historical data predicting the future, usually in a GLM multiplicative environment to kind of calculate the pure premium. So far, I would say quite standard. And the interesting topic now got introduced to this, in my view, through the pricing strategy that is also important here, that takes into account this claims estimation from step 1 and uses it as an input in order to estimate the competitive premium. So that's where really the commercial side of things for actuarial domain knowledge becomes important. And it's not just coming up with the best prediction through a black box algorithm that is important here. So we will talk about slightly more on this on the next slide, how the kind of game was designed. But for now, let's look on a just kind of symbolic market that we see here on the right, where we have exactly 2 participants or 2 companies. So every kind of team represents 1 insurance company. The revenue is a premium that was won and chosen in the market. So the assumption is that an individual policyholder will always go with the price that covers him and is the lowest. So this policyholder 1 will go with company 2 for 90 of currency, and not with company 1 because that's more expensive. Now, if we look at the revenue, we see that this is 15 for company 1 and 150 for company 2. The total loss is the sum of claim amounts associated only with the 1 policies. Thus, it's 0 for insurance company 1, and it's 110 for company 2. And important here in this very simplistic market of 2 players is, of course, the total profit. That is simply the difference between revenue and total loss. So we can kind of see that there below as well. Now we can jump to the next slide, which I will focus on just a little bit because it's quite technical, but it really is key to kind of understand how the game was designed to really, in a sense, downplay the factor of luck and to take domain knowledge from an actuarial perspective into more account than it is in more prediction style Kaggle competitions. So essentially, how should such a game represent the real world? this is actually quite tricky and done in 3 stages. First, an RMSE, so root mean squared error, is calculated based on the provided model and scored using only historical data. So that's the kind of standard approach, predicting the future with past claims experiences, with GLMs, GAM approaches, or whatever else. That's the kind of standard part. And important here is that these models can be built and evaluated instantaneously by a machine as many times as you want during a day and as many times as you want in general. So you could kind of build a GLM-based approach or a Tweedy approach or a tree-based approach, look at how that compares on an RMSE leaderboard immediately and see which one seems to be better given certain kind of situations. Now, in a second step, every user or insurance company applies a pricing strategy. So that means a loading or a discount to the expected claims experience and is bucketed with 9 others to form a market similar to what we have seen on the past slide with only 2 players. But now essentially we're doing it with 10 players, so yourself and 9 others. Now, important is that the profits can be calculated for each participant, similar to what we saw on the last slide. But this approach is permuted many, many, many times to generate stable results and to downplay the aspect of luck. Because what happens if you are kind of bucketed with 9 other players who are either very strong or actually very weak? Well, that's something that kind of you want to downregulate for that not to play such an ultimately big role until these kind of effects actually converge and you come up with a kind of stable average profit. Now, based on this average profit, each participant can actually be assigned a relative rank. And then in the third step, we actually kind of do a lot of things that we've done in the second step. Namely, we actually bucket again the players into groups of 10. However, we now choose the nine kind of others in a given bucket. So yourself plus the 9 other players, we choose based on the top 10 percentile of the rank that they received in step 2. So now you're really only competing against the very highly ranked people. Also, another kind of really strong attempt to downregulate the aspect of luck. Now, to improve the pricing strategies, these kind of results were evaluated on a weekly basis and then kind of given some feedback on the leaderboards, and was a little bit different, of course, than the RMSE approach, because in the RMSE approach, you could evaluate automatically as often as you felt like it or wanted to and get immediate feedback. Whereas here, you could maybe think about it for a week, you could adjust it a few times, but you only really could submit one actual pricing strategy at Saturday, at Friday evening, and receive the feedbacks only on Saturday. So you really need to think carefully what you wanted to submit. And with that, I can now pass on to Lucas talking more about the methodologies.
Thank you very much, Till. So I will now start to introduce what methodologies have been used, and I would like to start with an overview of what have been used by other competitors. And therefore, we first have to have a look at what challenges have to be tackled in this competition. So as Till already mentioned, we have, of course, the problem that many techniques are possible and could be tested, but nevertheless, we got changing data from evaluation from week to week, and also is metric only the root mean square error provided. So this means that one, for example, should also make own evaluations in order to capture in the end which change comes from a different model and which from changing data and environment. There were also just limited amounts of attempts. So for testing the accuracy, we had almost unlimited attempts, I would say. But nevertheless, a good accuracy in the end will not give you any rank on the final leaderboard. And for the profit leaderboard, we just received a feedback once a week. And therefore, we had to be very careful in investigating which changes led to changes in the profit ranking. And this leads to another challenge. So in real life, sometimes you get an overview of competitors by, for example, reverse engineering. And instead here, we could only see how other teams performed in terms of overall profit and ranking, but we had no access to their modeling, or let's say their premiums on a policy level. Some of the approaches were shared after the competition, and here I summarized a brief overview of what methods have been used normally by the more sophisticated teams. So for example, teams that focused on feature engineering a lot with, in the end, more than 300 variables, and also implemented an own market simulation for their models. Another team focused on detecting the large claims and also used meta models. So that means using some base models as GLMs, GBMs, neural networks, and some more, and use these predictions of these models as input for an overall model. We saw some niche strategies like heavy loadings for risky policies to avoid these, as well as teams that tried to be competitive on every segment. Another teams used stacking models, for example, of GLM and random forest, and also some classifications models to steer the loading. So overall, we saw an extensive use of modern approaches, but most teams afterwards said that in the end, they didn't spend so much time on the pricing strategy compared to the model building itself. So what did we do in comparison? When you have a look on the right, you see we started relatively late. So you can see that we didn't have a profit rake until week 6 of the game. Instead, we focused for the beginning on some simple feature engineering and focused purely on the accuracy of our model, starting with some vanilla gums. And then we improved our technical pricing step by step by switching, for example, from a 3D model to gums for frequency and severity. And at the beginning, just started with some interactions based on feeling. We also tried GBMs and tried to make use of the vehicle make model. So that was an encrypted variable for the type of the car, and there we tried to use some vehicle allocation with, for example, principal components analysis. As other teams, we also tried to detect large claims and to avoid these risky policies. And finally, we also used some automated machine learning approach with some metrics that were provided as proposals for interactions. And all of this led to some improvements on the accuracy and on the root mean squared error leaderboard. But nevertheless, when you have a look to the top right, you see that we had some fluctuations in our profit rank. So from over 100 down to 24, up to 90 again. And we used as pricing strategy 4 different segments of our premium according to some average variance extracted model with some fixed plus conditional loading. And with that, when you have a look at the market share, you see it was very difficult for us to steer that in a way. So we went there from 55% down to 5, up to 27 again. And in the end, I skipped to week 10. It was week 10 and we had to decide what to do for the final week. So for the final approach. And there we said, okay, let's summarize our findings first. So we saw that high market shares might lead to less profit and that it was very difficult to steer this market share in a changing environment. We also saw that our XG boost wasn't performing very robustly on changing data. And we also had a look in the discussion forum. So this was a forum where people were discussing about the game. And we saw that teams were heavily trying to avoid risky policies, even more from week to week, which makes sense in a way, but which can also be a chance or opportunity for us. As conclusion of these points, we decided to go with the more robust approach, with the GAM approach for the frequency and severity, and with just some, let's say, AutoML suggested interactions, with basically not a very, very complicated model. And we also deleted our large loss detection in order to also steer into that niche, because if everyone wants to avoid it, maybe there's a chance. And finally, we wanted to have a low but not extremely low market share. And as a result, we luckily succeeded in that with getting a bit of profit per policy. And that seems okay, profit per policy, that makes sense, but it's also more an exception, we will see in a second. And also getting a low market share of roughly 3%, which we were very happy with this. What are the lessons based on this? So luckily, after the competition, some first insights were shared by the organizer. And what you can see here is the expected profit of the teams versus the market share of the teams. And you can see a clear correlation between the two, and therefore the fact that a high market share isn't necessarily that desirable. Nevertheless, you need at least some market share in order to be able to make some money and get some policies, but not a very high one. And you can see this by having a look on the table on the right, and the fact that almost no one of the winners had an extremely big market share, with some exceptions on both sides. And we can summarize this effect with the term we call winner's curse. That means that almost every team that competed lost money. And this makes sense in a way, because when you win a policy, you're always the cheapest one in this auction and therefore probably underpriced. And we also saw another effect, and that is the question, how important is it to have a good performing model for getting a good rank? And we saw some correlation there. So better models in terms of the, for example, root mean squared error led also to better positioning in the overall profit leaderboard. And all the winning teams had good models, but this was never sufficient. But it's more a necessary condition to have a chance to place well. So with these two key learnings, so market share here, not too high, and a good model is necessary but never sufficient. I hand over to Till again.
Perfect. Thank you, Lucas. So I will wrap up with some of the key learnings and future outlook, or I would say recommendations that we would make for a potential pricing game 2.0. So first off, many academic papers are currently undergoing, looking at model complexity versus market profit, pricing strategy versus claims estimations, etc. And the reason why these academic papers can commence at the moment is because we actually didn't submit like basically just a vector of predictions like you do in a lot of Kaggle type competitions, but we did submit entire models. So entire models, model objects, I should say, in R or in Python. So there are dramatically more insights and things that like the game designers can try out based on this than you could in the normal setting. But I believe more importantly, what did we actually learn from the pricing game, and where do we see limitations that could be improved in the future? Well, just really kind of maybe 2 or 3 key aspects. One is that giving competitors more insights on how other companies or participants do the pricing is, as we believe, a key kind of improvement for the future, because in most markets you have aggregator websites, for instance, where you can really look, what does the competition do? How do they do their pricing? How can we kind of adapt to that to see if we're over or above price the market, maybe even just on coefficient level as well. So that's kind of quite important. Second, as we're a reinsurance company, naturally, we would also like to add some shock events and a reinsurance component. Like, for instance, we just talked about COVID. How does that impact the general insurance, or especially motor insurance? Well, to make the answer short, the impact is quite dramatic. So that really does make a difference to include such effects as a fun, extra non-vanilla strategical point to take into consideration. And maybe the most important is to give more importance to performance over time, and also let players or teams go bankrupt if wrong decisions are made. So for instance, we did jump quite highly between our kind of ranks on the given weeks. And this was to a large part also really attributed to the fact that Lucas and I really tried all sorts of different strategies. And in the end, we summarized, after trying the bounds of what we thought was interesting, what would be the best approach, and really summarizing all of that on the kind of final submission. Now, we could do that because it was completely risk-free with no kind of no strings attached. But in a real market, if you do that, you get a lot of kind of unprofitable profiles into your book, and you can't just get rid of them because you don't feel like, and you say, well, that didn't work, let's just kind of try again. That's something that should accumulate. So an accumulating effect may be similar to poker, where wrong decisions are really punished by the market, would be something to really consider in the future, to really make it more realistic, and maybe also to downplay the factor of luck even more. And now, really to the final point. So as you can probably see in the chat, I posted a link there. Please feel free to download our report on AutoML, which was a key component of our pricing game approach as well, because essentially we were able, with the AutoML software that we used, to try and find all interactions, the best possible spline combinations, etc., to really build the best model and use that as an input for the RMSE component that we rebuilt within R or Python. So we used R at this stage to be able to submit. So that's really a bit of a game changer in the simulated setting, but we're also convinced that this will be a major disruptor in the industry in the future. So feel free to kind of download our AutoML report. And also, we as GCU are currently running an updated version of our annual pricing survey with participants from around the world. So if you are interested to participate, please reach out to either Thibault, Lucas, and me. And that basically summarizes it, and we're up to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for very interesting, in-depth background to the pricing game. I know that this talk was a specific request that the SAS actually made to the team to come and kind of report back on the findings. So thanks for coming back and sharing this with us. There's a couple of questions. We'll keep it reasonably brief. One is a little bit more, I guess, technical in nature, which asks for what are, I guess, GBMs, gradient boosting machines, and neural networks, NNs. There's a lot that could be, I'm sure, communicated on that. So I'll just maybe see if you could perhaps respond via the chat on that question, if that's okay, in a summarized way. There's another question on, are there no economies of scale benefits from getting a higher market share that you saw? For example, spreading fixed costs over a larger base, or did it turn out to not be that significant?
So if I understand the question correctly, I would say in this case, the larger market shares were almost always not the way to go, because as Lucas mentioned, the winner's curse played a big role here in the beginning. So we simply saw that everyone with low market shares, well, low market share was almost kind of a prerequisite to perform well in the simulated economy. And also specific aspects like fixed costs were not taken into account in a way as they are in the kind of normal real world actuarial setting. That's, I think, in a nutshell, what I would say. Maybe Lucas, if you have something to add.
Exactly, yeah, like you said. So that is maybe also the difference. So the game was, let's say, designed in a way that it comes close to reality. But of course, something like the fixed cost and all of that was not taken into account. So it's really just simulated losses. And in this auction, where, for example, always the cheapest price wins, and yeah, such considerations didn't come into play there. Yeah, it was still a game. Say like this.
Yeah, thanks. And you've suggested some improvements and sort of expansions to the game as well. So hopefully there's another iteration. I guess another question. How would you summarize some key takeaways and maybe strategic takeaways for the audience that you've learned whilst doing this exercise? What sort of things that you can turn around and say, okay, well, this actually was quite effective if we did this way?
So I think from my side, the main strategic thing that we learned about the pricing game, maybe that can also generalize to the broader kind of sense, is that for actuaries, domain knowledge is the most important issue. So like really understanding the concept, making decisions, that should be the kind of heart at what we really do, and providing a better prediction that is maybe a couple of decimal points better in certain kind of measures such as AIC or whatever. That has not been important here actually, and I believe in real world scenarios is also not really the most important. The most important really is to spend a lot of time on the decision-making process and use a certain amount of intuition that you kind of gain over the years of really working as a hands-on actuary to succeed. I guess that's that's kind of my most important message here.
Maybe just very quickly, one thing to add. So I think what was an interesting learning for me is that it wasn't possible to analyze everything. So you have changing data, you have changing your own pricing strategy, your own models, and from all the competitors changing pricing strategies, changing models, and you don't know exactly what change leads to what. So there was also a bit, I would say, game theory or psychology involved. Just doing things like talking to others, looking into the forum, guessing they might increase loadings a bit. So it's not, you can not purely analyze it and come up with the best strategy. So that also tried that didn't work, I think, for no team. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think that's pretty real world in the way that companies go about setting the price sometimes. Okay, great. So Till, Lucas, and Thibault, thank you very much for your time and answering some questions. There may be a specific question on what are GBMs and NNs in the chat. I don't know if you can see the questions, so if you are able to perhaps type up an answer or provide that, that'd be fantastic.